Grognards of gaming, and this is the Grognard dog, Rob the Grognard dog, and with me, as always, is my very good friend.
Miracle Mike. We finally did find a name. Not to be confused with Magic Mike, which is something entirely different we don't want to get into.
No,
Uh,
well said.
but
Well said.
yeah, yes, we are back today.
We are, and we are back with the topic that we had discussed at the end of our last episode: campaigns versus one shots.
Yes.
So, why don't we, Mike? Let me know if you differ, but I think maybe we should start with one shots and then move up to campaigns. Start simple and then take off. All right. So
Yes.
I would love it for you to start. So you're a game master, and you were, gosh, one of our main game masters when we all first started playing Dungeons and Dragons with Beckme. And so you've been at this for a very long time. You also introduced our gaming group to the World of Darkness vampire role playing game when that came out in the early '90s or late '80s, whenever that was. And so you were the most familiar with the rules, and you were game master. And that's you have a storied history as a game master. So in your professional experience, when there is obviously a difference between how one writes, prepares, and runs one shot versus a longer campaign. So why don't you start us off, either talking about the two of them, comparing them side by side, or perhaps starting off with one shots, whatever is most meaningful for you.
Sure. And one shots are interesting because it's. I was actually introduced to one shots through the concept of cons. Okay. Now I have not done, I've done smaller cons, but I have done, I haven't done Gen Con or any of the larger, more national ones. I've done smaller ones. And I was introduced to the concept there. And it was interesting to me because, when we started playing, it was we'd spend an entire summer playing with one set of characters and running through adventures and, taking them from level 1 to level 10 or 15 or whatever it was at the time. Where one shot is different in that, you know, and I've thought about it in multiple ways because a one shot can be, one sitting of a couple hours, 4, 6, 8 hours, or one shot can be, you know, in a case of a con or something more popular now, which I don't know if you've ever seen, which is now on my bucket list, D&D in a castle, where you spend 4 days on one adventure and 6 to 7 hours a day, which is also a one shot. But the concept and the difference and the reason the one shot is interesting is um, you're putting together a set of characters and they're going through one adventure. Whether that adventure is a 6 hour adventure, whether that is adventure is a multiple day adventure, but it is one adventure. Um, where as a campaign, as I just mentioned, take your characters from early levels 1, 3, all the way up into the teens or 20s if you're actually that ambitious and want to get there. Um, and I think it's a phenomenon that was generated for cons, although I don't know. I was not the one who invented the idea. Um, and it's to me, it's interesting because it's a point in time. So it's you know how do you're preparing for one adventure. Um, and it's to me it's there's multiple things to look at and multiple variations of it. And what I mean by that is I have seen one shots, like I said, for a con, just going together and being able to get together with a group of people, whether you know them or do not, and do a single adventure and just have fun in the moment. I have also seen one shots done to expand on a campaign. And what I mean by that is, okay, you're playing in the year 500. Now you're going to do a one shot with characters in the year 100 as a background to what's going on in the campaign now, you know, or as a side hustle, or as a history, or world building. Okay, so one shots come in many different varieties. And that, you spoke to the difference in preparation. So it's, if you are doing a one shot just to do a one shot, I think the preparation, I don't want to say it's less, but it's less intense. Okay. You're setting goals for a short term period in a set of characters' lives. You're going to go from A to B. You're not going to go from A, B, Y, G, Z, and so many tangents. Um, but also, if you're doing it as part of your history or as part of your world building, that's a little more intense because you got to make sure things line up. You can't contradict yourself 500 years ago for something that's going on now, or you can and say, well, maybe they got it wrong. You can change the direction of the campaign. The thing that you've been thinking has been fact for all these years, and is not actually fact, because here's how it really happened, and here's how it changed. So it's a different set of preparation, but it's also depends on, are you doing it as a side gig, a history, a world building, or as I call it, a throwaway. This is just to sit down and have fun and go through, and we've never played 20 level 20 characters. Let's put together the most powerful characters we can and throw them against something, which would be more of a throwaway type thing. So that's my view on one shots. Now campaigns are, I want to do this. Like I said, we probably, when we were younger, we might have carried characters over 4 and 5 years through history and doing different things like that. So that is more, to me, that is more storytelling. That is definitely more storytelling, definitely more world building.
Well, let
What
me
a,
let me pause you there.
yeah.
Unless there's some more you wanted to talk about
No,
regarding shots,
no, I would like to hear what you say, please.
yeah, let me give my input on one shots, and then we'll talk about campaigns. So, I agree with everything you said, and I think that's exactly right. I agree that the prep is less intense for a one shot than it would be for a campaign. However, when the rubber meets the road and the players and player characters come into contact with your story, the story progression is more intense because you've got to get to the crux of the adventure, the climax, the denouement, the conclusion, all in one sitting. And so you've got to be intense about that. So what I recommend for those who are thinking about running one shots, that they may have some trepidation. I too have run one shots at conventions. I also have run many one shots for my home gaming groups. You want to get right to the action, so you don't want to spend a lot of time with an introduction, with information dump. You want to get right to the action, whether that means uh, the player characters all know each other and have a reason for adventuring together, which you can do before the story even starts as sort of a metagaming exercise, or they don't know each other and they're all gathered in one place when the session starting event happens, the explosion, the ship hitting the iceberg, the ninjas breaking through the front door, whatever it is. You want to get right to it, and you could even start the story in media res, Latin meaning in the middle of things. So it could be in the middle of a starship dogfight that you start, if everyone's playing, starship pilot characters or whatnot. And the very first thing you could say when to start the game is, "All right, everybody, roll for initiative." There's nothing wrong with that. And so for one shot, you want to get right to the action. If you do need a little bit of an introduction, you want to keep it short and sweet. And I also mentioned how the player characters know each other. That could be that could be by a common patron who sends them on the mission, or it could just be by chance. As I said, they're all on the ship when it hits the iceberg, something like that. And one thing you don't want to do throughout the session is you don't want the player characters to loiter. So if the player characters aren't being proactive, then it's sort of incumbent on the game master to enforce proactivity. And so one way you could do that is just events can conspire to make the player characters move. Again, it's the ninjas breaking through the door, it's the explosion, it's whatever you need. Or it could be a helpful NPC or a not so helpful NPC who forces the character to get moving. So, what I find to be extremely helpful when I'm running a one shot, and of course, everyone's game prep is different, but I find that whether it's a one shot or it's a session in a larger campaign, I like to come to the table with an 8.5 by 11-inch sheet of paper, one side only, with an outline of the main things I want to occur. And so there'll be maybe one, two, three, four main lines, and under each main line there will be some bullets, two to three or four bullets, and so the main lines are the things that I'm actually working to bring the players toward, and the bullets are things that can happen, in that scene. Now, of course, you don't want to be wedded to that. And I talked about in an earlier session of Grognards of Gaming the whole notion of the adventures of Luke Starkiller versus A New Hope. So I come to the table with an outline for the adventures of Luke Starkiller, and then once the my outline, my idea hits the players and interacts with them, and they put their input in, it doesn't necessarily end up where I ended up. It's not the Adventures of Luke Starkiller anymore. It's really A New Hope, what turns out to be A New Hope. And so those are, that's a real world example, because George Lucas's first treatment was called The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, and it was very different from A New Hope. And so, and that's a good thing, as A New Hope demonstrates. I don't know if you've ever read the script for Adventures of Luke Starkiller, but A New we should be happy it turned out the way. So you don't want to be wedded to your outline, because you're just one brain, and when you subject your idea to the brains of all of the other wonderful people around your table, you're going to get a much more creative story, and so you should think of it as a good thing. On the other hand, sometimes players are tired, they're bored, they don't they're distracted, they've got other things on their mind, they're not feeling creative that night, and so you at least have that outline as a default. So that outline is helpful in the context of a one shot. What I like to do is I like to timestamp the main lines in my outline, and you could even do this, if your outline is for a single session in a larger campaign. It helps you with pacing. But if you're not at this particular point or something similar to it by the third hour, you need to accelerate things,
Yeah.
or you could slow things down if you need to. So having those timestamps, like the first line, you probably won't have a timestamp for the first line. That would be 0. But then the second line would be maybe 1 hour. The third line would be 2.5 hours, and so forth. And I find that to be very helpful, because this way, when you look at the clock and you can see that they haven't uh, acquired the pertinent information, or they haven't fulfilled the prerequisite quest to get to this particular point down here in your outline, you may need to just forego a lot of what you've written and hand it to them a little bit more easily, so that they can progress. And so, I'm not saying, I'm not saying in a sense, you could argue, well, then you're rewarding characters for their inability to achieve, or their inability to progress. But look, it's a game, and you just may need to give the PCs the open door, or omit content that you've created to move them along. And last but not least, I think it's important to think of a satisfying ending for your one shot, even if it's one that is technically a failure to achieve the goal. And what I would recommend is, I would recommend coming up with, like, maybe a list of 3 to 5 satisfying ending options if they don't achieve the goal, so that this way it feels like a full story. And even if they don't capture the MacGuffin, maybe they've saved a princess, or maybe they've helped an NPC who is troubled, and you could sort of then, when you're wrapping up the session, move the focus away from the original MacGuffin to what their successes were, and how they are shown gratitude, or how they are rewarded in the end by the people in the village or whatnot for what they did do. Um, and another one last thought about one shots is sequelability. I mean, this is, you know, probably not. You probably don't need to worry about sequelability, because if you're running it for a con, you're never going to get those players and those characters back together again. These are people from all over the place that you wouldn't game with normally. But if you're running a one shot for your close friends, because one of the players in your scheduled Dungeons and Dragons game couldn't show up that night, and you didn't want to proceed without them, and you said, you know what, let's do a one shot of something else tonight, and then we'll when our player is able to rejoin the fold. So if you're going to do something like that, you never. I've been in situations where we've done that, and we came up with the setting and the story on the fly, and everybody was like, "This is a great story and setting," you know. And if you're getting the sense that everybody's really enjoying it, and that you may want to revisit this one shot world again in the future, you can always at the end leave a little seed. So if you think that there's a possibility that your one shot could blossom, maybe write a little sequel ability seed at the end so that you can give everybody um, a reason to want to revisit that world. So that's those are my thoughts. Do you have anything more you want to add?
Uh, a question for you, and this is because so one of the challenges I have found, or one of the challenges I have found with one shots is, um, you guys have talked about it before, and other people have talked about it many times before, which is some of the enjoyment is giving each character a chance to shine. I have found that at times more challenging, both when the players do not have the investment because they know this is a throwaway character, also because you haven't had time to build a story with the character. In some cases, the character story is at its peak or to its culmination or things of that nature. Um, and so I'm wondering how you think. I've had challenges with it, I will admit, because sometimes, like you say, when you're trying to move the story along, how do you get to each player, especially if you have many, seven, six, seven, eight? How do you get to them to give them a chance to shine? Do you write that into the one shot plan, or do you let that happen organically, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, well, you can do it both ways. So, it first of all depends on the gaming system. So, if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons, uh, a game like that is divided up into classes. So you can create scenes that are designed to allow a particular class shine, and you could create scenes that can allow multiple classes to shine. So let's say um, you devise a scene that where with a challenge where a thief or a cleric could really be very helpful in solving the thing. Then when you assemble the players, if nobody plays a cleric, you've got the thief there. But maybe you don't have the thief. What if everybody deals with fighters or something? Well, then maybe you deal with that with an NPC, or you leave a door unlocked for them in a metaphorical sense, but it could be even in that literal sense, particularly with the thief example. So there's that. The other one is the other option is you can sort of do it on the fly if you're experienced enough as a GM, and so you do have a sort of there's always a subset. Whether it's a genre, what the subset of character archetypes are going to be. Even if you don't have classes in this particular RPG that you're using, the archetypes. If you're playing, let's say, the champions system or the fate system, which don't have character classes, and but that you're playing the two-fisted pulp hero setting. Well, you know what the tropes are, and so you can sort of plan ahead of time. But that something that has less structure like that is going to require a little bit more thinking on the fly. But you know, uh, th- this is how so a game like Fate is helpful because you have a high concept and a trouble. And so when the players are telling you their high concept and trouble, while they're filling out all of the rest of their character sheet, you could start figuring out how that high concept or that high trouble could be integrated into your story. That's a little bit of a shooting from the hip sort of thing, but there's some prep time, and an experienced GM won't need much prep time. And in the end, if everybody doesn't get a chance to shine, it's not the end of the world. It is ideal if you could get every player character a moment in the spotlight. But if you can't, as the GM, manage that, uh, it really is also partly up to the players to be proactive in getting their player characters into the story. And so, if you really feel like you want to help a player who's sort of a lilting violet and doesn't know how to be proactive, you can always turn to that player in the middle of a scene and say, "And what does your character do here?" And then you could try to draw the spot, draw the person into the spotlight. That's a way to do it.
Okay, that sounds
Yeah.
good. All right.
So campaigns. So you were going to pontificate about campaigns. Please do go on.
So, and campaigns, and again, this is probably where we all started way back in the day. You're playing with a small group of friends, you're playing long term, and it's campaigns. To me are and were at the time, um, having I enjoyed writing fiction and fantasy even as a young man, and ideas for fiction and fantasy as a young man. But this is campaigns are a chance to you know build your world. Now I will say that, but it's also, where we started, we grab, you go back to Dungeons and Dragons. There were like a set of like, and still today it's this way. There's a set of like 6 modules, and this is level 1 to 3, and this is level 4 to 6, and this is level blah, blah, and they go in order, and the world is built for you, and it's keeping you in a particular storyline and a particular area of the D&D world, whether that was, um, the Sword Coast or Greyhawk or any of these. They were keeping you in a particular world. But in mine, like it's at least for me as a GM, I'll admit I find it more rewarding than a one shot because it gives me a chance to build a world. Whether I'm doing it from a set of provided materials or I'm starting from scratch. Um, but it's you get a lot more investment. The thing that I was mentioning about making players shine, you collect players and you build a history for your players. They're building their history, they're building their story, and you're folding their story into your story. And it's you have things that you can little strings you can tug on in their background in order to make them move in certain directions, and you can take a whole session or maybe 1 or 2 sessions and focus on the side story of a single character, and then come back and give them each their individual time going along, while you're working for it. And it's you know and it's one of the things, because I'm going to say this and I'm going to ask you your preference, because it's you've done a lot of world building. I know that you've done a lot of world building. Well, I've done a lot of world building, and it's sometimes it's hard to get caught up in I'm going to build the whole world versus you know and think of it this way: I'm going to build this continent or this half of the continent because that's where the players and the characters are going to start. And as they're going out, then I'll develop more, because some of the ideas that come in the shorter story are going to inform the longer story and the continuation. And it's so not something you do in cons, something that takes, in my mind at least, a lot of investment, a lot of love, and a lot of time. And does it always work out? No. Have I ever, retired a campaign and brought it back in later years? Absolutely, to try with a different set of players. But it's, in my mind, it takes the most time, it takes the most effort. But it's also, I think, more creatively rewarding than the one shots, at least for me. And it's an investment. It really is. It's a shared story, and it's a shared long term story. I laugh because I watch Critical Role. I'm sure that you've watched some of Critical Role as well. And when this first came out, I'm sitting here going, if we could have taken the stories we told from when we were teenagers and the campaigns we ran from when we were teenagers and done this with it, we all might have been doing something different with our lives right now. But but I think about things like that. What about yourself? Where do you see the campaigns?
Yeah, well, so I agree with what you said, and you sort of hit upon. I like to give these Seinfeldian terms for things. So you hit upon this distinction between what I like, well, what is commonly known as sandbox style, and
Yes.
what I have called draw distance creation. Now, you're a tech guy, so you know what draw distance is. Draw distance is it's a setting. It can be in a video game usually, and if you set your draw distance to be very far away, when you're walking along, you could see the landscape loading very far from you. If you set your draw distance to be very low, things far away don't load so much, and you may see just blank, or you may just see ocean and sky, and you only see what's immediately in front of you. And as you move forward, the world is creating itself in front of you because your draw distance is low. So I think that most campaign creation is a mix of both. But the sandbox model, it reminds me of the television show Community. They did 2 episodes where the characters in the show sit around a table and play Dungeons and Dragons. And in the second Community episode where they're playing Dungeons and Dragons, they invite somebody who's not a part of their friend circle in to play Dungeons and Dragons with him and with them. And and the guy Abed, who's running the game, he says, "Okay, you all start out on a bridge and you're at the foot of a castle. And what do you do?" And the player who's not part of their circle says, "Oh yeah, what I always like is when I'm plopped down in the middle of a railroad track and told what to do." He says, "What happens if I don't go towards your castle? I turn around and go the other way, Mister Dungeon Master. Am I going to fall off of your world?" And Abed says, "I've made a few notes about what happens," and he picks up this gigantic binder and he plunk starts opening it up. And so that's an example of a dungeon master who has created the entire sandbox. You've front loaded all of the work, and it's all there. And once you've done that, it does take a lot of time and a lot of preparation. But once you've done it, you really could kind of sit back and let the players drive the story. You've got what happens, who's there, what's going on around them already in that big binder. But the other style, which still involves a lot of time and work, but it's spread out, and it's not front loaded. Is this draw distance creation method where you maybe just create as much of your world as you may need for the first session or three, and then depending on where the characters go in the area of the world that you've created, then you can build concentric circles around their ending point. And then when they move to another ending point, you make concentric circles around. And then what you may find is the outer circles of those multiple concentric circles start to overlap, and hey, you see connections from this part of the world to that part of the world and so forth. So it doesn't have to be all the work up front like that. You can spread it out. Now what I think one needs for a campaign as opposed to a one shot is you do need a meta plot that has many potential story arc plots nested within it. So, for example, a super villain, an overarching villain that the players don't meet and may not even know about in the first story arc or two. So let's again use Star Wars as a perfect example because it is a perfect example of archetypal storytelling. At least the original trilogy was. So in there, one thinks that Darth Vader is the big bad evil guy, but he's really not. And you don't even find out until really the third movie. You get a hint in the second movie that Vader serves someone else, that there is another master, but it's only like a half of a scene, and you don't really get much out of it. And if you're really only watching the movie once, you might not even really process that scene very thoroughly. It's not until the third movie where it opens with the real big bad evil guy coming in. And so that's a great example of the first movie is its own self-contained story, the rescue of the princess from the dungeon. And so that doesn't you I think there's a line of dialogue where the princess in question mentions the emperor, but you're never really given a glimpse that the emperor is the overarching villain. The second movie is again an act two, but it is its own adventure. And so this is what you can do. You can have the big bad evil guy. You may not even learn about him until sometime in, but you've got these minor villains. You've got a Darth Vader. You've got um, you know
Jabba the Hutt.
the Hut. Yeah, exactly.
So,
That the players have to contend with in their story arcs. And a story arc, would be about two or three sessions, roughly about that. And I think that's a good number of sessions for a story arc. And each one can have its own villain who could be terrifying in his own way. But then there's this meta plot. Why are these villains doing what they're doing? Because there's this other set of events that the players eventually learn about. And one great thing about campaigns is that it really gives you time to breathe and to include complications or troubles for each player character, even as its own session. So instead of trying to give each player character the spotlight in a scene like you might do for a one shot, you could devote an entire session to a single player character and play to that character's strengths. And the other if the other players are not experienced, they might raise an eyebrow and go, how come he's getting all the stage time? But if they are experienced, or if they're not, you can explain this to them. Everybody eventually gets a spotlight, so don't worry. Your turn will come. And so it's good to pay attention to character backgrounds, and because that's the way your players communicate to you what they want to see in the story. And so you
Yes.
could draw complications from their backgrounds, troubles. If someone's hunted by a bounty hunter like Han Solo, you could dedicate a session to that bounty hunter showing up, or something like that. So, but I strongly recommend doing that. I recommend including complications or troubles for each player character into your campaign. That really is important. And last but not least, when it comes to a campaign, although you might not need to get right to the action, although you might not need to start it in media res like you do for a one shot, you do want to start strong with a campaign, because the players are sitting around knowing it's going to be a campaign, knowing they're going to be in this for the long haul. And so, like that wonderful scene in Throw Mama from the Train, where Billy Crystal is like languishing over the first line of his book. The night is hot. No, no. The night is wet. No, no, no. The night is humid. No, no, no. The night is wet and hot. No, that's humid. You do want to
Yeah.
a lot of thought to how you're going to start, because as Billy Crystal explains in that movie, it's that opening line that really sets the tone and draws the reader in, and it's the same is true for role playing game storytelling.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I like the strong beginning. I like you know particularly in fantasy and even in sci-fi. Starting with something like a legend. Here's the story of a legend. Blah 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 blah, and then we're going in and here's where you start. This legend started 200 years ago in your village, or it started in your village and went here, and this is where the king came from, and everything like that. And then going to yeah, it's always good for a strong beginning like that. Absolutely.
And
So
and one last comment I would say about your campaigns is, you do also want to think about how the campaign will end, what needs to happen to bring it to a fulfilling conclusion. And it may be confronting that overarching villain that you've got running the whole meta plot. Um, that's actually probably going to be it. And so, you do want to keep your toe in the water as the game master at all times, and see what the atmosphere is, how the players are feeling about the story, because then you might get a sense that they're ready to wrap up and move on to a new genre or game, or something like that. And so then you could think of a session or two ahead about maybe bringing them to the thrilling conclusion, introducing them to the meta plot, and having them destroy the Death Star, or whatever it is that is the meta plot. So, how about you? What are your thoughts for ending a campaign?
that's interesting, and it's for me again. It's world building, and that's something that maybe we can take on in a later episode. But um, happy endings versus not so happy endings would be a
Yeah.
nice later episode, because it's you always want the players, like you said, to be satisfied, to have reached some goal. But even when you're saying, so you have the original Star Wars trilogy, where things end in certain ways. The first movie doesn't end so well. You lose a main character. The second movie doesn't end so well. yeah. Um, and the third movie ends pretty well. It ends pretty well, but there's it's still not all positive. So it's I really think, and that's the other reason, long term understanding and understanding your players. What are they all happy ending people? Are
Mm,
they all this kind of people? Are they all that kind of? And the happy ending for one person may not be a happy ending for another person. So it's a balancing act. But it's at the end, I think, as long as it's a good story, that's all
right.
that really matters.
Right on. I think that is the perfect point to end this. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any ideas that we may have missed for one shots or for campaigns, please write below in the comments, fill us in, teach us. We're here as much to learn as to teach. So, we're always very interested in hearing from other Grognards, or new folks who are new to gaming and have some new ideas to bring to the table, to the gaming table. And so there you have it. So Mike, what do you think? Next episode, what might be an interesting topic to talk about?
Well, we have been often referring to um, material, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, different things like that. How about we have an episode on what we use as source material and why? So, in other words, where did our original source material come from? Where does current day source material come from? What inspires us? What kind of a story? We all plagiarize a little bit, a
Yes.
little bit.
Yeah,
When we were younger, we did it a lot, and we'll get into that. But but where do you get your inspiration? What are the stories that other people write that inspire you to create a character, create a story, so on and so forth? I think that might be a good insight, because we've done it a lot over the years. So what do
that's
you think
right.
about that?
Yes. If Bono from U2 has taught us anything, it's every artist is a cannibal, every poet is a thief. So very good. So then we will see you next time on Grognards of Gaming, where Miracle Mike and Rob the Grognard dog will be talking about source material. So we hope you'll tune in. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.